Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about smoke taint in wine, which, if you are new to the industry, has been a very big problem for wineries. Um, Lots of wildfires, lots of destruction of vineyards, but also just producing smoky wine. So we're going to talk all about it. So, a little overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about wildfire impact statistics. We're going to define what is smoke taint, where it comes from. We'll go over current treatments and research, how to test for smoke taint, and how to treat smoke taint in wine, right? So, a little bit of wildfire statistics. Specifically for the California wine industry, there's been lots of fires in California, all across the United States, actually, especially the West Coast. So this is not new information for a lot of us, but for the wine industry specifically, we were hit with multiple vintages of wines and wineries being devastated by fires. So in October 2017, we had the Wine Country Fires, or the Northern California Firestorm. This was a series of 250 wildfires that started burning across California. 21 of them became major fires, destroying 245,000 acres in total. From 2019 to 2020, over 1 million acres burned in some of the top wine-growing counties of California. So Napa, Mendocino, Lake County, Marin, and also Sonoma. And then also with that fire from 2020, we had approximately $601 million worth of grapes just for California being left in the vineyard. So not fantastic, very, very devastating. And then in 2021, for all of us that live here in the Sierra foothills, we had the Caldor fire, which devastated our local industry. Most folks were not able to keep the 2021 vintage. We have worked very hard to treat the vintage, and some of us are doing the best that we are all doing the best that we can. But overall, it has been very difficult for our industry and our businesses. I have a really nice article here linked from Jefferson Public Radio talking about the Caldor fire and how it's very difficult to estimate the damage and the impact of these fires, like financially, as far as like the economy and businesses that were affected. It highlights one of the local Mexican restaurants and how they were lost over like $10,000 worth of sales, but also from like food waste that had gotten thrown away because of evacuations and power outages. So it's really hard to put a dollar amount on the destruction from the fires. We can calculate the acres burned, but there are in the homes that were lost potentially in buildings. But when you talk about a value of wine and a value of a vineyard, say it was a historic vineyard that was over 100 years old, it's really hard to put a price point on the value of that. So overall, very sad situation, but it is what it is, and we're trying to make the best of it. So those are just a couple statistics for you guys. Definitely not all inclusive to what the state has seen in total. So what is smoke taint? Smoke taint occurs when vineyards or grapes have been exposed to high concentrations of smoke for a period of time, resulting in wines that smell and or taste like wildfire, campfire smoke, or leave an ashy aftertaste. So an important point to touch on here is that like the extent of smoke taint depends on the exposure, and what you taste in the wine will depend on that, right? So there are all sorts of spectrums of like a light smoke tainted wine might be somewhat pleasant, might kind of smell like woodsy or a little bit of like campfire, but in a decent way. But then there's like a really intense taint of smoke, which could taste like you're licking an ashtray and leave like a really gritty sensation on your mouth and be really disgusting. So it varies, right? And then also an important point is the type of wine and the types of grapes that you're growing and how they were impacted by the smoke. So lighter reds are going to have a very hard time masking that smoke. They will be heavily impacted. So like Pinot Noir, it's going to be very difficult to hide or kind of wrestle with that smoke taint in the wine compared to like a Petit Verdot, Petit Syrah, very heavy, bold wines. That smoke might integrate somewhat and still might be somewhat sellable to consumers. So it just depends on the level of smoke taint and the varieties that you're working with. So where does smoke taint come from? Smoke taint comes from volatile phenols that come from wildfire smoke. They are absorbed into the skins and juice of the grapes. So volatile phenols, the smelly components, penetrate through the skins. They bind with sugar. And the important thing to know is that once they bind with sugar, they become odorless in juice. So it's a chemical transformation that renders it unsmellable. So when it's bind with sugar, it's odorless. It's not until the yeast gets introduced during fermentation and that sugar is consumed that those compounds become volatile again, and you can smell them in the resulting wine, right? So for a long time, we were only able to determine smoke taint in fermented samples, but now we have new technology and new ways where we found biomarkers in the juice samples before fermentation as well. And then here I have a little picture of what a phenol looks like for you guys, but we're going to talk about that on the next slide, or the one after this. So here's a nice picture of what's kind of happening during this process. We have a nice summary up here and then a picture for you guys. I definitely want you to be able to describe this process on your own. Don't worry about if you understand or are able to come up with glycotransferases binding to sugar compounds. That's great. If you can just give me an overall understanding of how it goes from a smell to how it's odorless and then how the smell comes out again, that will definitely be on a quiz or an exam or both. So we have a fire within proximity to vineyards, which leads to smoky wine, right? So this is the smoke compound, and it ends up with an enzyme binding to sugar, right? And once it's bound to sugar, it's no longer smelly anymore. Then after fermentation, the sugar is cleaved and it starts to smell again. And that is because it moves from becoming a phenolic group to not a phenolic group anymore, which we'll talk about that here. But what creates a phenol or phenolic is it's a class of organic compounds that includes a hydroxyl end group attached to a carbon and an aromatic benzene ring. So this is a benzene ring, this is a hydroxyl group, and this is the phenol that comes as a result of that. So this structure is what allows this compound to become aromatic and to smell, right? So when we go back and we look at this chart, it makes sense that this is undetectable to our smells because here's the benzene ring and here's the hydroxyl group. The hydroxyl group becomes, switches out with the sugar compound, right? And then through fermentation, begin to smell it again. So that's why we can't smell it while it's bound to sugar. So hopefully that if you are not into chemistry, that's okay. But I would like you to explain this process, but I also want you guys to be able to identify and define what a phenol is and what it looks like too. Be able to look at some different drawings and identify which ones are phenolics and which ones are not. So volatile phenolics come from many parts of the winemaking process. They're not always bad. Sometimes they're good as well, right? So this is just like we talked about in our winemaking presentation. Volatile phenols come from activity of microorganisms, the grape itself, aging, and processing decisions. So for smoke taint, that would come from the grape itself because smoke is directly impacting the grapes. So that is where that would kind of sneak in there. Here is a chart of common volatile phenols in wine. So some of these are positive and some are negative. Again, these are just some of the most basic common ones that we find. So 4-vinyl guaiacol can smell like carnations or clove, depending on the concentration that's present in the wine. This comes from yeast, right? Then we also have 4-EP and 4-EG. Those are the shorter names for 4-ethyl guaiacol and 4-ethyl phenol. These are from Brett yeast. We talked about wine faults and where wine faults come from. Brettanomyces is a very common yeast in the brewing industry, but it is considered a taint in the wine industry. So sweaty saddle, Band-Aid, and also wet dog are components that you would expect from that yeast. Then we have guaiacol, which is something that we actually do utilize with oak barrels and aging, and it can be present in most oak barrels depending on the level of toasting inside the barrel. This will literally give descriptors of smoke, bacon, maybe even barbecue with wines. But too much is a bad thing, of course, too. And so with literal smoke exposure, you are getting those same compounds, but at a very high concentration, right? And then we have vanillin, which is very common with American oak. It's that nice sweet vanilla component as well. I have a nice little link down here to Waterhouse's lab from UC Davis from going over what volatile phenols are, right? So the specific volatile phenols that are associated with smoke taint that we want to look out for and that people test for are the following. We have guaiacol, 4-methyl-guaiacol, syringol, some cresols, and then also trans-resveratrol. These are what the chemical structures look like, and these are what we find as a result of wildfire smoke in wine. So that's what we'd be looking for. I'm not going to expect you to memorize these, but like I said earlier, I do want you to be able to identify the structure of a phenol, so the benzyl ring, the benzene ring, and then also the hydroxyl group attached. You can see that all of these contain that. So you'd want to be able to identify which are phenols and which are not on the quiz. Okay, so the next question would be, when are grapes most susceptible to smoke taint? When are they going to get impacted by this, right? So previously we thought that if there wasn't any sugar present in the grape, that smoke could not impact the grapes until sugar was present because it was binding with those sugar compounds. It turns out with more recent research, thanks to an Australian research paper and also the Australian Wine Research Institute, along with UC Davis findings, that it does not matter necessarily what stage the grapes are developing at. They can still be impacted. So if your fruit has just set and a fire comes through, it's less likely for a fire to come through because this is the spring, early summer when things are still mostly green. But if a fire were to come through, it could still impact those grapes. We don't really know to the extent of how much it would impact it, but we do know that it's present in the following wines, even if no fires happened the rest of this season. So a lot of work is going into studying this and understand it better. Check out this Australian research paper. Some very good information about that. Okay, another thing that impacts your grapes and the degree of how much it impacts is whether it's fresh smoke or old smoke. So if it's a fire that's right next to your vineyard, it's fresh smoke, and the smoke is just blowing right over your grapes, and it's sitting in your vineyard and marinating, that is the absolute worst situation for grape smoke taint. If it's a vineyard that's many miles away and the fire started a day or two ago and the smoke is now just blowing over through your region, you're most likely going to be okay. It turns out that smoke has a half-life, so if it's traveled for over 24 hours, it's much less harmful because smoky phenols have a half-life of sorts. So thank you, Anita Oberholster from UC Davis. That's very, very important information. So yeah, another thing that will be really important to your vineyard, and most vineyards are designed this way, is if you're planted on a slope or if you are in a canyon and you have really good airflow, which a lot of vineyards utilize anyway to help prevent mold and mildew, that smoke will keep moving. It won't sit in one place. So that could come to your aid as well, just your topography. Okay, so the wine industry, of course, has seen huge losses from these fires and smoke taint, but there was a huge cluster of a situation that happened during the 2020 to 2021 years because of COVID, and also with the need for smoke taint testing. This was so new, and this became such a huge problem so quickly for our local regions. And also during the pandemic, the labs were working with like skeleton crews. People weren't allowed to be indoors together, people wearing masks 6 feet apart, and like less people working. So some people during these massive fires were demanding tests from grape growers before purchasing grapes to make sure that the grapes weren't smoke tainted. Well, with the new testing being needed and a shortage of staff in these professional labs, people were waiting over 30 days for results, and some people had to send their samples all the way to Canada for testing too, just because the region became so impacted from all these people demanding tests, lack of staff, and lack of response. So overall, I'd say most all the wineries in the Sierra foothills that harvested in 2021, most of that wine was not utilized. And a lot of winemakers might be sitting on that wine still and trying to figure out what to do with it, or they might have sent it off to a distillery, or they might have taken a tax write-off and dumped all of that wine. So it was very hard to utilize any of the wine from 2021, and most folks are happy that that vintage is hopefully out of their cellars. So good news, right? Upcoming research and development. There have been some methods tried, lots of brainstorming and collaboration to try to help each other out through this crazy situation. And one of the solutions was proposed by WSU horticulturists, and this was a product called Rain Guard. So Rain Guard is a palm wax that they spray on cherries to help prevent splitting. So when cherries grow and expand and they absorb water, they can expand very quickly, and that will create cracking on the skins of the cherries, and they become less favorable to eat, right? No one wants a cracked cherry. They don't want like a regular cherry. It's delicious. Okay, so it turns out that this wax could help prevent the impaction of smoke from entering the berry, which is fantastic. It seems like a really good, easy solution. However, multiple applications of this needs to be applied to your vineyard to really be effective, and it would have to be done before a fire starts, right? So if these fires are unpredictable, we don't know when they're going to happen. This could be an extra cost for winery, but it could be a solution to help them. Luckily, the wax does not affect the fermentation. It doesn't impact the flavor of the wine, so this could be a good solution for some people, right? So if you are a home winemaker and you have a smaller lot and this could be affordable and manageable for you, this could be a solution if you're worried about smoke in future vintages. Another way that wineries were treating smoke was through ozone treatments. And this is a very expensive and intense process. They were loading these bins into these like containers and then closing it and then gassing them with ozone. They did see a small depletion of the smoke phenols in this process, but it did not remove all of them, and it was not a silver bullet process as far as like completely treating all of the volatile phenol compounds. So it was something, but ultimately not very effective. I will say that Boger Winery, when I first started working there, they were working on treating and brainstorming how to work with these 2021 vintages. And we did a really intense reverse osmosis filtration system. And we saw it was a very expensive process, but we only saw a 15% depletion of the smoke compounds in the wine. And as the wine, after bottling, as it started to age, started to produce more smoke compounds, became more smoky. So ultimately it was a valiant effort and we did everything we could at the time to treat these wines, but we still have not found a process to completely remove these compounds. Everything we're doing is just barely scratching the surface of what's in the wine, unfortunately. Okay, another winery, Garden Creek Vineyards, they took their grapes and they distilled the grape pumice, and they decided to emphasize the smoke flavor and make grape grappa from that. That was a creative and good effort, but they still approximated that they lost around $800,000. So I'd have to say, sorry, San Francisco Chronicle, I do not agree with the title of this article, Wineries Make Lemonade Out of Lemons. I'd say wineries try to survive and are still in the red. So anyways, check them out. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting approach to dealing with smoke-tainted wine. Okay, how to test for smoke-tainted wine. So testing can be done in two ways, right? So previously it was just bench scale fermentations, but now we can actually test for these biomarkers from the juice samples as well, so before fermentation. So if you take this to a professional lab, because not all labs have these abilities, and I'm sure it's going to be expensive processing, right? So for berry samples, you can find those smoke compound biomarkers through acid hydrolysis for GCMS, which acid hydrolysis would remove those smoke compounds, then GCMS would help to separate those compounds, then quantify for you the concentrations, right? So I do have linked here the how these devices work. They're very interesting, very good tools used for lots of applications. They also use liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry. So if you're interested in reading about these, I do have them all linked on this slide here. Then we have bench scale fermentations, which is done in like a French press coffee maker, which I think is hilarious. You get a French press, load it full of grapes, and add some yeast and do a little fermentation. Then afterwards, you can take it through gas chromatography or HPLC, which is a liquid chromatography method, or you could do through sensory analysis, where is you just smell and taste after fermentation, and then see if you can pick out those smoke compounds. If you are a home winemaker or just a small winemaker who can't afford these very expensive procedures, the bench scale fermentation is going to be the best way to go for you, and it's really in your control, and you're not waiting for results. It's going to be a lot less expensive too. So sensory analysis is kind of a fun topic, because dealing with wine sensory for smoke has been a new beast for the wine industry. So previously in 2021, it was estimated that only 25% of people cannot detect smoke taint in wine. So 25%. I think it's actually less than that now. I think more people understand what they're looking for smoke taint, and we've had so many wines come out with a 2021 vintage locally that people know what they're looking for now. The big thing to look for with smoke tainted wine is an ashy aftertaste or a lingering retro-nasal ashy character on the palate. So that is after you taste something, it's the smell that lingers in the back of your throat and in your nasal cavity. That's your retro-nasal. So we do smell things by breathing in, but we can also smell by breathing out too. So if you ever like tried to smell your breath, like, oh, is that me? That it would be like a retro-nasal, what's coming back through there too. Another important note that if you work in a tasting room or you have a business, it's very important to know is that once you do taste a smoke-tainted wine, the smoke can linger in your mouth and affect everything else that you're tasting after that. So if you are doing a lineup of a wine tasting and you are serving a wine that has smoke taint, be very careful that you do that last, or at the very last of your dry reds before you go into the sweet stuff. Make sure that you place that accordingly on your lineup, because it could affect the impression that your other wines give. Okay, how to treat smoke-tainted wines. So if you don't know about the Australian Wine Research Institute, you should. It's a fantastic resource. They have a great website, lots of winemaking tools and information and research papers, and it's very friendly to everyone of all educational backgrounds. It's not just pure research papers. It's very nicely written and well-organized articles, very thorough and accessible to everyone from every background, right? So I do have a link to their resources specifically for smoke taint here, but feel free to explore their whole website. It's fantastic. So what the Australian Wine Research Institute suggests for treatments of smoke-tainted wine are the following. You could use activated carbon, nanofiltration, enzymes, untoasted oak chips, or you could do a wine dilution. All great resources, all great options. Activated carbon, like we talked about in our wine fining lecture, is non-selective and can be pretty intense. So just follow the instructions that they recommend for that. But as a consequence of not being selective in what it binds to, it can remove everything from your wine. So just be careful. And then as far as trying to make a wine and limit the smoke extraction, the recommendation from a lot of companies have been to really minimize the extraction from the skins. You'll need to ferment the juice. That's a non-negotiable. It's how wine is made, but there is also smoke phenols in the skins as well. So if you limit the extraction from the skins, you should have less overall smoke. So this means less pump overs, a cooler fermentation don't over macerate your fermentation, and also just minimize contact with the skins in general, right? So Oregon is very famous for their Pinot Noir, of course, and their approach has been to do no skin contact at all and just to make a white wine from red grapes. Excuse me. So this has been helping them to limit their smoke extraction. It's been somewhat successful from what I hear. I'm not an expert and I don't buy a lot of wine from Oregon, but from what I hear, it has been helpful. I will say from personal experience that making a white wine from smoke impacted grapes, the wine tasted fine within the first maybe 6 months of it being, bottled and freshly fermented. But as that white wine has aged, the smoke compounds have started to come out. So if you're going to purchase wine that was made from a smoke vintage like this, drink it as soon as possible because the smoke will start coming out later as well. So just be careful. All right, and with that, we have our student learning objectives. So definitely review these before you take the quiz and before you take the exam. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out and email me. And then I also have all of our wonderful resources laid out on just this one slide as well. So any articles or any links that were on the slides are all posted here on one slide as well. Perfect. All right, well, I hope you learned something new. I hope you had a good time. And I will look forward to seeing you all next time.